The annual Vascari Foundation Charity Gala was the most anticipated social event of the season, where influence, wealth, and prestige gathered beneath glittering crystal chandeliers. Politicians exchanged handshakes with billionaire investors. Celebrities posed for photographers. And journalists captured every carefully curated moment that would fill tomorrow's headlines. Every detail of the evening reflected elegance. From the fresh floral arrangements lining the marble staircase to the orchestra, performing softly beneath the grand ballroom's vaulted ceiling. Guests admired designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, sparkling jewelry, and polished smiles. Each person eager to reinforce their place among the city's elite. It was an evening built on appearances, where status often spoke louder than character. Moving quietly through the crowd was a young woman. Almost no one noticed. Hazel Mercer wore a graceful evening gown while volunteering with the event staff, her volunteer badge resting discreetly against the fabric. Without drawing attention to herself, she welcomed arriving guests with genuine warmth, offered champagne to those waiting for conversations to begin, adjusted seating cards that had been accidentally misplaced, and patiently guided elderly donors to their tables before they had the chance to ask for assistance. Whenever someone thanked her, she responded with the same gentle smile before slipping away to help the next guest. To everyone watching, Hazel appeared to be nothing more than another dedicated volunteer helping the gala run smoothly. Her quiet kindness stood in sharp contrast to the glamorous entrance of Celeste Rowan. Every camera turned toward her as she entered the ballroom wearing an exclusive couture gown adorned with diamonds that glittered beneath the lights. She paused deliberately near the entrance, allowing photographers enough time to capture every angle before continuing inside with practiced confidence. Celeste had spent years cultivating an image of flawless sophistication. Luxury brands competed to dress her. Influential socialites welcomed her into their circles. And she never missed an opportunity to remind others of her status. Compliments fueled her confidence, while attention had become something she considered a necessity rather than a privilege. As she greeted familiar faces, Celeste's eyes wandered across the ballroom until they settled on Hazel. For a brief moment, she frowned. Hazel's elegant dress, though simple and understated, possessed a timeless refinement that immediately caught her attention. The fact that someone she assumed was merely serving drinks could wear something so tasteful irritated her far more than she cared to admit. Straightening her shoulders, she crossed the ballroom with a smile that barely concealed her contempt. Stopping directly in front of Hazel, Celeste glanced slowly from her shoes to her shoulders before letting out a quiet laugh. "That's a beautiful dress," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Although I'm surprised, someone working the floor could afford something like that." A few people turned to watch, curiosity replacing their conversations. Hazel offered a polite smile. "Thank you," she replied calmly, intending to continue serving the guests. Instead, Celeste stepped sideways, blocking her path. "You know," Celeste continued, examining the fabric with exaggerated interest, "there are some things people simply don't deserve to wear. Expensive clothes don't magically make someone belong here." Several guests chuckled softly, uncertain whether they were witnessing playful teasing or something far more cruel. Hazel remained composed, refusing to argue. She simply lowered her eyes and tried to move around Celeste, hoping to avoid creating a scene. The attempt only seemed to amuse Celeste. "Ignoring me won't change reality," she said with a smirk. "People should learn their place." She reached toward Hazel's gown, pretending to inspect the material. For a split second, the room assumed she was merely touching the fabric. Then, without warning, Celeste gripped the dress firmly with both hands and pulled with all her strength. The sound of tearing silk cut through the ballroom like a knife. The elegant gown ripped from Hazel's shoulder almost to her waist, leaving the expensive fabric hanging in tatters. Gasps echoed across the room. Some guests instinctively covered their mouths in disbelief, while others raised their phones, eager to record the scandal unfolding before them. A handful exchanged awkward laughs, unwilling to intervene as though the humiliation had become another form of entertainment. Hazel froze for only a heartbeat. Without uttering a single complaint, she instinctively gathered the torn fabric together with trembling hands, trying to preserve what little dignity remained. Her face revealed no anger, only quiet embarrassment. She neither shouted nor accused anyone. Instead, she stood silently beneath hundreds of curious eyes while whispers spread rapidly through the ballroom. Celeste folded her arms, clearly satisfied with the attention now focused on her. "Perhaps next time," she said coldly, "you'll remember that not everyone is meant to wear something that expensive." Her words hung heavily in the air, emboldening the silence around her. No one stepped forward. No one defended Hazel. Even those who looked uncomfortable chose to remain spectators rather than participants. Just as the humiliation threatened to consume the entire room, a calm voice broke the silence from behind the crowd. "Take one more step toward my wife." The ballroom instantly fell silent. The words carried no anger, no raised volume. Yet every syllable commanded absolute attention. Conversations stopped. The orchestra lowered their instruments. Even those recording with their phones slowly lowered them as the crowd parted almost instinctively. Dante Vascari walked forward with measured, unhurried steps, his perfectly tailored black tuxedo untouched by the tension surrounding him. His expression remained composed, his gaze fixed entirely on Hazel. Without acknowledging anyone else, he removed his dinner jacket and gently draped it across her shoulders, carefully covering the torn dress before quietly asking, "Are you hurt?" Hazel looked into his eyes and offered a faint smile. "I'm all right." Only after making sure she was comfortable did Dante slowly turn toward Celeste. His face revealed no rage, yet the complete control in his expression unsettled everyone far more than an outburst ever could. The silence became almost unbearable as he met Celeste's frightened gaze. Finally, he spoke. "Who gave you permission to touch my wife?" For several long seconds, no one dared to speak. The sentence Dante had just uttered continued to echo through the ballroom with greater force than any public announcement ever could. Guests who had eagerly recorded Hazel's humiliation only moments earlier slowly lowered their phones, suddenly realizing they had captured something entirely different from the spectacle they had expected. Faces that had been filled with amusement now reflected disbelief. Conversations dissolved into stunned silence as hundreds of eyes shifted toward the quiet woman standing beneath Dante's jacket. The elegant volunteer everyone had dismissed as insignificant had just been introduced as the wife of Dante Vascari, one of the country's most influential business leaders. Across the room, Gavin Sterling felt the color drain from his face. Hours of meticulous planning, months of preparing the foundation's most important charity gala, and every effort to impress Dante suddenly seemed meaningless. Instead of earning the chairman's admiration, his own girlfriend had publicly humiliated the woman standing beside him. Gavin forced an uneasy smile, searching desperately for words that might contain the disaster unfolding before him. "There must be some misunderstanding," he began cautiously. But before he could continue, Dante raised a single finger. The gesture was calm, almost effortless. Yet Gavin immediately fell silent. No one questioned the authority carried by that simple movement. Celeste, however, stood frozen where she was. Only minutes earlier she had enjoyed being the center of attention, convinced she had exposed an ordinary volunteer who dared to wear an elegant gown. Now the confidence that had defined her expression had vanished completely. Her heartbeat quickened as she stared at Hazel, searching for some sign that this revelation had to be false. "You're really his wife?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Hazel met her eyes without anger or satisfaction. She simply nodded once. "Yes, There was no dramatic speech, no attempt to embarrass Celeste in return. Only a quiet answer delivered with remarkable dignity. Ironically, that single word unsettled the audience even more than an emotional confrontation would have. Everyone mentally replayed the past few minutes, the mocking remarks, the laughter, the cruel assumptions, and the sound of expensive silk tearing apart. One uncomfortable realization spread through the ballroom. They had all witnessed an innocent woman being humiliated, and almost no one had chosen to intervene. The silence was eventually broken by an elderly gentleman standing near the front of the ballroom. He narrowed his eyes while studying Hazel's face more carefully before leaning toward his companion. "I know her," he murmured. The woman beside him looked puzzled. From where he hesitated for a moment, before his expression brightened with recognition. "She's one of the volunteers." His comment quickly spread to the surrounding guests. "The volunteer," someone repeated in disbelief. Another donor frowned. "That can't be right." Before anyone else could respond, a longtime member of the foundation's organizing committee stepped forward. "Actually, it is," she said. "Mrs. Mercer has volunteered here every year for the past 3 years." Curious whispers immediately rippled through the crowd. Several organizers nodded in agreement. One quietly added, "She always requests the same assignment, guest hospitality." Another smiled as memories returned. "She's usually the first person to arrive and the last one to leave." As more people looked at Hazel, forgotten moments slowly resurfaced. A hotel owner laughed awkwardly before rubbing the back of his neck. "Last year I spent 20 minutes explaining hospitality management to her because I assumed she was new." His friend stared at him in disbelief before bursting into embarrassed laughter. "You gave hospitality advice to Hazel Mercer." The businessman groaned and covered his face with one hand. "Please don't remind me." Nearby, another investor raised his hand sheepishly. "She once walked me across the ballroom when I couldn't find the conference hall." A retired ambassador smiled sadly. "My wife was struggling to walk in high heels during last year's gala. Hazel stayed beside her the entire evening without ever introducing herself." An elderly donor nodded. "She carried my plate because my hands were shaking." Another guest remembered asking her where the restroom was, while someone else recalled apologizing because he thought she looked too elegant to be working as a server. Every news story painted the same picture. Hazel had quietly helped countless people without expecting gratitude, recognition, or even remembering most of the kindness she had shown. The foundation's senior event coordinator finally stepped forward to address the growing crowd. "There is something everyone should know," she said. "Mrs. Mercer has refused VIP treatment every single year. She insisted on wearing the same volunteer badge as everyone else. Whenever we offered private accommodations, she politely declined. She preferred changing clothes in the volunteer dressing room instead of the executive lounge. After every gala ended, she stayed with the staff until well after midnight, helping stack chairs, organize decorations, and prepare the ballroom for cleanup." Several volunteers standing nearby nodded immediately. One young woman added, "She even carried heavy boxes when the rest of us were exhausted." Another smiled through tears. Whenever someone thanked her, she always replied, "We're all here to help." A reporter lowered his camera, struggling to understand why someone of Hazel's reputation would willingly remain anonymous. The coordinator answered before anyone could ask the question aloud. Because she wanted people to judge her by her actions, not by her name. The revelation became even more astonishing when another organizer quietly shared Hazel's professional background. "Many of you know her work," he explained. "Even if you never recognized her face." Curious expressions spread across the audience. Hazel Mercer is one of the country's leading hospitality interior designers. She has designed award-winning luxury hotels, historic restorations, wellness resorts, and international conference centers. Guests stared at one another in disbelief. The organizer continued, Her projects have received international design awards. Industry magazines regularly feature her work. Major hotel groups compete for her services. Yet she has never once used those achievements to seek attention here. A businessman blinked repeatedly as the realization settled in. You're telling me one of the most respected hospitality designers in the country has been serving drinks at this gala, not serving drinks? The coordinator corrected gently. Serving people. The distinction lingered in the silence that followed. Around the ballroom, people began recalling details they had overlooked for years. They remembered how every gala seemed unusually welcoming. How elderly guests never struggled to navigate the venue. How first-time donors always felt comfortable despite the grandeur surrounding them. They remembered thoughtful seating arrangements, attentive volunteers, accessible pathways, allergy-friendly dining services, and the warm atmosphere that distinguished the Vascari Foundation from every other charity event in the city. None of those experiences had happened by accident. Hazel had quietly shaped every detail while allowing others to receive the praise. Suddenly, the evening's greatest irony became impossible to ignore. The woman who had devoted years to making everyone else feel respected had been judged solely because she appeared to be an ordinary volunteer. Yet even as admiration spread through the ballroom, Hazel herself remained unchanged. She thanked the volunteer who nervously handed her a glass of water. She reassured a frightened young waitress that no one blamed her for the incident. She smiled warmly at an elderly donor whose hands were still trembling from the confrontation and gently helped him return to his seat before checking whether the other volunteers needed assistance. She neither demanded apologies nor sought sympathy. She never reminded anyone of her accomplishments or corrected those who had underestimated her. The only thing that mattered to Hazel was ensuring that everyone around her felt comfortable despite the tension that had overtaken the evening. Watching her, many guests experienced an uncomfortable moment of self-reflection. Wealth could purchase influence, titles could command attention, and prestige could open countless doors. But none of those things explained the quiet grace Hazel continued to display after enduring such public humiliation. The more they observed her, the more they understood that true dignity did not depend on expensive clothing, famous connections, or social status. It revealed itself through ordinary choices made when no one expected recognition. Moments earlier, they had mistaken Hazel for someone insignificant because they believed importance could be measured by appearance. Now they realized they had overlooked the most extraordinary person in the room simply because she had chosen humility over applause. Long before anyone discovered she was Dante Vascari's wife, Hazel Mercer had already earned something far more valuable than admiration. She had quietly earned the respect that only genuine character could inspire. The stunned silence lingering over the ballroom was finally interrupted by Celeste Rowan. Desperate to regain control of the situation, she forced a nervous smile that convinced no one. She smoothed the front of her designer gown as though restoring its perfect appearance might somehow repair the damage she had done. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding," she said, glancing around the room in search of support. "The dress tore because I reached out to stop her from dropping the tray. It was an accident." Her explanation drifted across the ballroom without receiving a single response. Even those who had once admired her elegance refused to nod in agreement. Gavin Sterling immediately recognized how fragile her story sounded. Yet years of protecting her public image made him instinctively step forward. Wearing the practiced smile that had helped him negotiate countless business deals, he addressed the guests with diplomatic confidence. "Perhaps we should avoid making this evening even more uncomfortable," he suggested. "After all, tonight is about generosity and charity. There is no reason to embarrass anyone further." His words were carefully chosen, but they arrived too late. The truth had already begun demanding its own voice. Before anyone else could respond, the foundation's elderly executive director slowly rose from his seat near the control table. His expression reflected both disappointment and quiet resolve. Looking first toward Dante, he spoke respectfully. "Chairman Vascari, with your permission, I believe everyone deserves to see exactly what happened." Dante answered with nothing more than a slight nod. The ballroom lights dimmed immediately. Conversation ceased as a large projection screen descended behind the stage. Within moments, the security footage appeared. There were no dramatic edits, no emotional narration, and no selective camera angles, only the objective perspective of the ballroom's surveillance system, capturing every movement exactly as it had occurred. The audience watched Hazel moving gracefully among the guests, carrying a silver tray of champagne while greeting everyone with the same warm smile. She paused to assist an elderly couple, adjusted a misplaced chair for another guest, and quietly continued her work without drawing attention to herself. Then Celeste entered the frame. The recording clearly showed her noticing Hazel from across the room. She stopped walking, studied Hazel's elegant dress with obvious disdain, and deliberately approached her. The audio system carried every word through the now silent ballroom. "You don't deserve to wear something that expensive." The sentence echoed through the room with painful clarity. Several guests instinctively lowered their heads, suddenly remembering that they had heard those exact words only minutes earlier. The recording continued. Celeste circled Hazel slowly, mocking her appearance while a few nearby spectators laughed awkwardly instead of intervening. Hazel answered politely, attempting to continue serving guests. But Celeste blocked her path once again. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding, no accidentelle collision. Every movement was deliberate. Finally, Celeste reached forward, grasped both sides of Hazel's evening gown with unmistakable intention, and pulled with all her strength. The elegant fabric split apart from shoulder to waist exactly as everyone remembered. The microphone installed near the ballroom ceiling even captured the sound of guests laughing while Hazel instinctively gathered the torn material around herself, trying to preserve her dignity without raising her voice or seeking sympathy. When the recording ended, the screen faded to black, leaving behind a silence heavier than any accusation could have created. There was nothing left to debate. No interpretation could alter what everyone had just witnessed. Celeste's face lost every trace of confidence. She opened her mouth repeatedly, searching for another explanation, but every excuse died before reaching her lips. Her carefully cultivated image of sophistication collapsed within seconds beneath the undeniable weight of the truth. For years, she had built her reputation on luxury, exclusivity, and flawless appearances. Yet all it had taken to destroy that illusion was a few minutes of unedited reality. One of the city's most respected philanthropists slowly stood from her table. Looking directly at Celeste, she spoke with visible disappointment. "I have spent decades encouraging people to give generously," she said. "Tonight you reminded us that generosity without kindness is nothing more than another performance." Her words settled heavily over the audience. An internationally renowned fashion editor followed quietly. "I admired your elegance for years," she admitted before shaking her head. "I confused style with character." Around the ballroom, influential donors, business leaders, and longtime supporters of the foundation began distancing themselves both physically and emotionally from Celeste. Conversations that had once welcomed her now ended abruptly as guests turned away. Journalists who had arrived expecting glamorous photographs redirected their cameras toward the uncomfortable reality unfolding before them. Every flash illuminated not celebrity fashion but the consequences of arrogance exposed in public. Several corporate sponsors exchanged uneasy glances. "I fully aware that tomorrow's headlines would associate their brands with the evening's scandal unless decisive action followed." The admiration Celeste had spent years collecting disappeared almost instantly because it had never been rooted in genuine respect. Standing only a few feet away, Gavin experienced a different kind of collapse. Unlike Celeste, whose reputation crumbled because of a single act, Gavin realized his downfall had been unfolding quietly for years. He had repeatedly ignored warning signs whenever Celeste's behavior threatened others because confronting her might have complicated business relationships or disrupted carefully managed public appearances. Maintaining a flawless image had always seemed more important than addressing uncomfortable truths. Now every compromise returned to confront him at once. Investors who had previously praised his leadership now questioned his judgment. Members of the organizing committee exchanged disappointed glances, recognizing that he had tolerated cruelty whenever it benefited the foundation's social standing. Gavin finally stepped toward Dante, abandoning the polished confidence that had defined him throughout the evening. "Chairman Vascari," he said sincerely, "I offer my deepest apology. What happened tonight does not represent the values of this foundation." Dante regarded him calmly before answering with quiet precision. "It represents the values that were permitted." The sentence contained no anger, yet it struck Gavin more powerfully than any public condemnation could have. He lowered his eyes because he knew the statement was entirely true. Institutions rarely failed because of a single, cruel individual. They failed when decent people accepted that cruelty in exchange for convenience, influence, or personal benefit. Gavin suddenly understood that leadership was measured not by successful fundraising campaigns or impressive guest lists, but by the courage to protect those with the least power. That lesson arrived too late to save either his reputation or the carefully orchestrated image he had worked so hard to preserve. While others struggled with embarrassment and regret, Hazel remained remarkably composed. A volunteer quietly offered her a replacement shawl, which she accepted with sincere gratitude. She thanked the staff responsible for arranging the security footage, not because it defended her reputation, but because it protected the truth. She comforted a young waitress who feared she might lose her job because of the disturbance, assuring her that none of the evening's events were her fault. Even after enduring public humiliation, Hazel showed no desire for revenge. She never demanded that Celeste be removed from the gala, never celebrated the collapse of another person's reputation, and never reminded anyone of her own accomplishments. Her quiet compassion contrasted so sharply with the bitterness surrounding her that many guests found themselves admiring her even more deeply than before. Sensing that the evening had reached a turning point, Dante slowly approached the podium and picked up the microphone. Every conversation ceased immediately. Some expected him to announce legal consequences. Others anticipated a public condemnation of Celeste or a humiliating dismissal of Gavin. Instead, Dante rested one hand gently against the podium and allowed his eyes to travel slowly across the audience before speaking. "Many of you believe tonight became unforgettable because of what happened a few minutes ago," he began. "I believe you are mistaken." The room listened in complete silence. What happened tonight did not create the truth. It simply revealed it. He turned toward Hazel, who remained quietly standing among the volunteers rather than seeking the spotlight. "For the past 3 years, many of you have praised this foundation for its warmth, its hospitality, and its ability to make every guest feel genuinely welcome. You admired the thoughtful seating arrangements, the kindness shown to elderly donors, the careful attention given to guests with disabilities, the volunteers who treated every visitor with equal respect, and the atmosphere that distinguished these galas from every other charity event in our city." Several longtime donors nodded almost unconsciously as memories resurfaced. Very few people ever asked who created those experiences. Dante smiled softly. "My wife did." A ripple of astonishment moved once again through the ballroom. She redesigned the flow of every event, so older guests never had to struggle through crowded entrances. She worked with chefs to ensure every guest, regardless of dietary restrictions, enjoyed the same quality of service. She trained volunteers to greet every donor with equal warmth. Whether they contributed $10 or $10 million, she reminded us that hospitality is not measured by expensive decorations but by how people feel when they walk through our doors. The foundation's executive director stepped beside him, unfolding a small notebook he had carried for years. "There is something Mrs. Mercer told us before our very first gala together," he said. "I wrote it down because I believed it captured the true meaning of charity." Adjusting his glasses, He read the sentence aloud. If our guests remember the flowers, we decorated well. If they remember how people treated them, we succeeded. The words settled gently over the audience, leaving many guests visibly emotional. Volunteers wiped away tears, while longtime supporters exchanged quiet smiles of recognition. They suddenly understood why every Vascari Foundation event had always felt different. Its greatest luxury had never been crystal chandeliers or expensive floral displays. It had been the invisible kindness shaping every guest's experience. Dante returned to the microphone one final time. There is one truth I hope none of us forgets after tonight. He looked toward Hazel with unmistakable admiration. Character does not become valuable because power recognizes it. Character is valuable long before anyone notices. For a brief moment, complete silence filled the ballroom once again. Then, somewhere near the back of the room, a single pair of hands began to applaud. Another guest joined. Then another. Within seconds, the applause spread throughout the ballroom until every table echoed with genuine appreciation. People slowly rose to their feet one after another, creating a standing ovation unlike any the foundation had ever witnessed. They were not applauding because Hazel was married to one of the nation's most powerful businessmen. They were applauding because they had finally recognized the extraordinary woman who had spent years quietly serving others without expecting recognition. Many guests found tears filling their eyes as they realized how easily they had mistaken humility for insignificance. In that unforgettable moment, wealth, influence, luxury, and social status faded into the background. Only one thing remained worthy of admiration: the quiet strength of a woman whose kindness had never depended on whether anyone was watching. As the applause gradually faded and conversations returned in quieter voices, many of the guests found themselves asking the same question. Why would a woman as accomplished as Hazel Mercer choose to spend years serving behind the scenes without ever revealing who she truly was? The answer reached far beyond the events of a single evening. It was rooted in the values that had shaped her long before she became one of the country's most respected hospitality designers. Long before she met Dante Vascari, and long before her name became associated with prestigious hotels or international design awards, Hazel's story began in a modest neighborhood where success was never measured by wealth or social status. Her father devoted his life to restoring historic buildings that many people considered too old or too damaged to save. He believed every structure carried memories worth preserving, and he approached each project with extraordinary patience. Rather than chasing recognition, he found satisfaction in knowing that future generations would continue enjoying places that history might otherwise have forgotten. Hazel often accompanied him to restoration sites after school, fascinated by the way neglected spaces could slowly regain their beauty through care, craftsmanship, and perseverance. Watching him work taught her that meaningful achievements were rarely created overnight. They were built quietly, one thoughtful decision at a time. Her mother influenced her in an entirely different way. Instead of working in glamorous environments, she volunteered at community shelters, where families struggling through difficult circumstances found temporary refuge. She organized donated furniture, helped children create welcoming study areas, and showed parents how even the simplest room could become a place of comfort and dignity. She often reminded Hazel that kindness was never defined by the size of a gift, but by the respect shown to the person receiving it. Whenever someone praised her generosity, she simply smiled and replied, "If people only feel valued when someone important is watching, then we haven't truly helped them." Those words became one of the guiding principles of Hazel's life. Growing up with parents who valued humility more than recognition shaped Hazel's understanding of success. While many classmates dreamed of becoming famous or wealthy, she became fascinated by the emotional impact that thoughtfully designed spaces could have on people's lives. She noticed how a comfortable waiting room eased anxiety, how natural light encouraged conversation, and how simple details often made strangers feel welcome. By the time she entered university to study interior and hospitality design, she had already decided that beautiful buildings should serve people before they impressed them. Her academic journey was anything but easy. Hazel received no special advantages, no influential connections, and no financial shortcuts. She balanced demanding coursework with part-time jobs, spent countless nights refining design concepts after classmates had gone home, and often questioned whether her unconventional ideas would ever be accepted in an industry obsessed with luxury and prestige. While many aspiring designers focused on extravagant chandeliers, expensive materials, and dramatic architecture, Hazel concentrated on how guests actually experienced a space. She studied accessibility, human behavior, environmental psychology, and customer comfort with equal passion. Professors admired her originality. Though some warned that clients might prefer more glamorous solutions, Hazel listened respectfully but refused to compromise the philosophy she believed in. She was convinced that the most memorable environments were not those that looked the most expensive, but those that made every visitor feel welcomed, respected, and understood. Years of determination gradually transformed her into one of the industry's rising talents. Boutique hotels, historic resorts, and luxury hospitality groups began seeking her expertise because her projects consistently achieved something architects alone could not explain. Guests lingered longer, returned more frequently, and described her spaces not simply as beautiful but as comforting. Awards followed, along with invitations to international conferences and interviews with leading design publications. Yet despite growing recognition, Hazel remained remarkably unchanged. She still visited completed projects anonymously, quietly observing how ordinary travelers interacted with her designs, instead of attending glamorous launch parties or celebrating media attention. She believed the people using her work were far more important than the headlines praising it. It was during the restoration of one of Vascari International's historic hotels that her life unexpectedly intersected with Dante Vascari's. At the time, Hazel knew almost nothing about the company's chairman. She had been informed only that an executive representing the investment group would attend several planning meetings to oversee the project's financial decisions. When Dante entered the conference room for the first time, he introduced himself simply as a representative of the ownership group. He made no effort to emphasize his position, and Hazel never asked about it. To her, he was simply another client whose project deserved her complete attention. Their first meeting quickly revealed just how differently they viewed success. Reviewing the renovation plans, Dante suggested increasing the budget to create a grand entrance filled with crystal chandeliers, imported marble, and dramatic architectural features that would immediately impress visitors. Many consultants would have enthusiastically agreed with such an opportunity. Hazel did not. After listening carefully, she calmly offered another perspective. "Our guests won't remember another chandelier," she explained while pointing to the floor plans. "They'll remember whether an elderly couple can comfortably reach the reception desk without becoming exhausted. They'll remember whether a family traveling with young children feels welcomed instead of overwhelmed. They'll remember how the space made them feel long after they've forgotten what it looked like." The conference room fell silent. No one had ever challenged Dante's ideas with such confidence, yet without the slightest trace of arrogance. Most consultants competed to impress him, carefully agreeing with every suggestion made by one of the country's most influential businessmen. Hazel treated him no differently than anyone else. She respectfully defended her professional judgment because she genuinely believed it served the project better. Instead of feeling offended, Dante found himself unexpectedly fascinated. Their discussion, originally scheduled for 1 hour, stretched into nearly 4 as they debated design, hospitality, leadership, and the responsibility successful businesses carried toward the people they served. For perhaps the first time in years, Dante realized he had spent an entire afternoon listening far more than speaking. The restoration project eventually concluded with remarkable success, but their conversations continued long afterward. They discovered that despite coming from vastly different worlds, they shared remarkably similar beliefs. Neither measured success by wealth alone. Both believed leadership existed to improve other people's lives rather than elevate one's own importance. Friendship gradually deepened into affection, and affection quietly became love. When Dante finally confessed his feelings, Hazel did not ask about his fortune, his influence, or the future that came with the Vascari name. Instead, she asked him a single question that left him speechless. "If nobody knew your name," she asked softly, "who would you be?" Dante carried that question with him for days. Every achievement, every business victory, and every public honor suddenly seemed incomplete without an honest answer. When he finally returned, he admitted that he wanted to become someone worthy of respect, even without the reputation attached to his family name. Hazel smiled gently, and in that quiet moment, both of them understood that their relationship had been built upon something far stronger than admiration or success. It had been built upon shared values. Their wedding took place in a private ceremony, attended only by close family and trusted friends. Shortly afterward, Dante suggested announcing their marriage publicly. The news would instantly place Hazel among the country's most recognized women. Magazine covers, luxury brand partnerships, exclusive interviews, and countless opportunities would follow. Many people would have accepted such recognition without hesitation. Hazel declined every one of them. One evening, as they shared dinner together after returning from work, Dante gently asked whether she was certain about keeping their marriage private. Hazel reached across the table, took his hand, and smiled with quiet conviction. "I don't want doors opened because I'm your wife." She paused for only a moment before finishing the thought that would remain etched in Dante's memory forever. "I want them opened because I earned the key." Those words captured everything she believed. She did not reject Dante's success. She rejected the idea of borrowing it. Hazel wanted every opportunity she received to be the result of her own work, every award to represent her own dedication, and every professional achievement to belong entirely to her. If someone respected her, she wanted that respect to come from the quality of her character and the value of her contributions rather than the surname she could easily have adopted. Dante admired her all the more because of that decision. Rather than feeling insulted, he understood that the greatest gift he could offer the woman he loved was not greater influence, but the freedom to remain completely herself. Together they made a promise. Their marriage would remain private. Hazel would continue using her own surname. She would build her career independently, accept both success and failure on her own merits, and never rely upon the Vascari name to advance her ambitions. Dante would quietly support her from the background, celebrating her accomplishments without claiming any credit for them. Standing in the ballroom years later, wrapped in Dante's jacket after the painful humiliation she had endured, Hazel realized she had never regretted that decision. The secret had not protected her from cruelty, nor had it spared her from unfair judgment. Instead, it had revealed something far more valuable. Without knowing her identity, people had shown exactly how they measured another person's worth. Some looked only at appearances. Others respected titles more than character. Yet those who recognized genuine kindness had done so long before discovering who she really was. Looking back, Hazel understood that her parents had been right all along. True dignity was never granted by wealth, influence, or famous names. It was earned quietly through consistent choices, honest work, and unwavering compassion. Those qualities could never be inherited, purchased, or borrowed. They had to be lived every single day. And that was precisely the legacy Hazel Mercer had always hoped to build. The standing ovation gradually faded into a quieter atmosphere. Yet the emotional impact of the evening remained visible on every face in the ballroom. Conversations resumed softly, no longer centered on wealth, influence, or social prestige, but on personal reflection. Many guests found themselves replaying the events in their minds, wondering why they had remained silent when Hazel needed someone to stand beside her. Onabiwan, people who had watched without intervening approached her. Not because cameras were recording or reporters were nearby, but because their consciences would no longer allow them to walk away unchanged. The first to step forward was an elderly donor who had supported the Vascari Foundation for nearly 2 decades. Her hands trembled slightly as she stopped in front of Hazel. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Unable to meet Hazel's eyes. "I saw what happened, and I should have spoken before anyone else did." Hazel smiled with the same warmth that had comforted countless strangers over the years. She gently took the woman's hands into her own and replied, "You don't owe me anything." The woman shook her head. "I do." Silence can hurt just as much as cruel words. Hazel's expression softened even further. "You chose courage today," she answered. "Sometimes kindness arrives later than we hope, but it still matters." Tears filled the donor's eyes as she embraced Hazel. Grateful for a forgiveness she felt she did not deserve, others soon followed. Business executives, volunteers, journalists, and longtime supporters formed an unplanned line, each carrying their own quiet regret. Some apologized for laughing. Others admitted they had assumed Hazel was insignificant because she wore a volunteer badge. A few confessed that they had judged her solely by appearance before learning her name. Hazel accepted every apology with remarkable grace. She never reminded anyone of their mistakes or asked them to justify their behavior. Instead, she thanked each person simply for choosing honesty. Watching those conversations unfold, many guests realized forgiveness often required greater strength than revenge. Hazel possessed that strength naturally. The volunteers who had worked beside her for years surrounded her next. Several looked embarrassed, believing they should have defended her more quickly. One young waitress approached nervously while holding a carefully wrapped garment bag. "We found another evening dress in the volunteer wardrobe," she explained shyly. "It isn't nearly as beautiful as the one that was ruined, but we hoped you might accept it." Hazel looked at the young woman with genuine appreciation before accepting the gift with both hands. "Thank you," she said warmly. "That means more to me than you know." Rather than changing in the private suite reserved for distinguished guests, Hazel quietly returned to the same modest volunteer dressing room she had used every year. It was a small space crowded with folding chairs, coffee cups, sewing kits, garment racks, and exhausted staff members finishing a long evening of work. It had never been luxurious, but it had always felt honest. When Hazel emerged wearing the simple replacement gown, a gentle round of applause spread through the ballroom once again. This time, no one admired the dress itself. They admired the woman wearing it. As the gala drew to a close, and the last guests prepared to leave, the grand ballroom slowly transformed from a glamorous celebration into the familiar scene that followed every successful event. Fresh flowers were carefully removed from their displays. Candles were extinguished one by one. Tablecloths were folded, and volunteers gathered decorations while the cleaning crew prepared to work through the night. Despite everything that had happened, Hazel quietly rolled up the sleeves of Dante's dinner jacket and began stacking printed menus onto a nearby cart. A volunteer tried to stop her. "Mrs. Vascari, please," he insisted. "You've done more than enough tonight." Hazel smiled and continued organizing the materials. "The evening isn't over until everyone goes home," she replied gently. Dante watched her from across the ballroom with unmistakable admiration before walking over. A quiet smile crossed his face as he leaned beside the table. "You know," he said playfully, "I'm fairly certain no one would object if the chairwoman's wife skipped cleanup this evening." Hazel laughed softly while placing another stack of menus into a storage box. "I'm not the chairwoman's wife," she corrected him with affectionate amusement. "I'm yours. And neither title excuses me from helping." Dante shook his head, unable to hide how deeply he admired the woman standing beside him. Only an hour earlier, She had received a standing ovation from the most influential people in the city. Yet here she was, doing exactly what she had done after every previous gala. Quietly helping others without expecting anyone to notice. One of the volunteers observed the couple from a distance and smiled to herself. Some people inspired those around them not through speeches or authority, but through ordinary actions repeated consistently over time. Hazel had become that kind of person. Later that evening, after the ballroom had finally emptied and the city lights shimmered beneath the windows of the Vascari penthouse, silence settled comfortably between Hazel and Dante. Wrapped in a light blanket, Hazel stood on the balcony overlooking the skyline, while Dante handed her a warm cup of tea. Neither spoke immediately. The events of the evening still lingered quietly in their thoughts. Eventually, Hazel broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if we made the wrong decision?" she asked. Dante looked toward her with quiet curiosity. "About what?" "Keeping our marriage private." She traced her fingers around the edge of the cup before continuing. "If people had known from the beginning, maybe none of tonight would have happened." Dante considered her words for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're right," he admitted. Hazel looked at him with surprise. "It wouldn't have happened." He paused before gently taking her hand. "But then we never would have discovered the truth." She remained silent as he continued. "For 3 years we've wondered whether people respected you because of who you are or because of the name you could have carried. Tonight answered that question. Before anyone knew you were my wife, they revealed exactly how they judged another human being." Hazel reflected on the evening, the laughter, the whispers, the painful humiliation, the sincere apologies, the volunteers who stood beside her, and finally the standing ovation that had come only after people understood who she truly was. Yet throughout every moment, one thing had never changed: her own choices. She had still comforted frightened volunteers. She had still thanked those who offered help. She had still treated every guest with kindness regardless of how they treated her. Her identity had never depended upon another person's opinion. Dante squeezed her hand gently. "You were never hiding," he said softly. "You were simply living honestly. And honesty always outlives admiration." For the first time since her dress had been torn apart, the ache inside Hazel's heart finally began to fade. Not because the world now knew she was married to one of the country's most powerful businessmen, but because she realized something far more meaningful: respect that depended upon wealth or influence could disappear overnight. Respect earned through years of quiet integrity could never truly be taken away. 6 months later, spring sunlight poured through the glass walls of the National Center for Arts and Culture, where architects, designers, philanthropists, educators, and journalists from across the country gathered for one of the industry's most prestigious celebrations. The National Humanitarian Design Awards recognized professionals whose work had improved lives far beyond aesthetics. For the first time in many years, Hazel accepted an invitation to stand openly in the spotlight. This time she arrived beside Dante. Not because she needed his recognition, but because neither of them had anything left to hide. As they entered the auditorium, the Master of Ceremonies smiled warmly and addressed the audience. "Please welcome award-winning hospitality designer Hazel Mercer." Not Mrs. Dante Vascari. Not the chairman's wife. Simply Hazel Mercer. The audience applauded immediately, celebrating the woman whose achievements belonged entirely to her own dedication. A short documentary appeared on the theater's enormous screen. Rather than showcasing glamorous hotels or luxurious ballrooms, it highlighted ordinary people whose lives had been quietly improved through Hazel's work. An elderly veteran comfortably navigating an accessible hotel lobby. A child with sensory sensitivities finding peace inside a thoughtfully designed waiting area. Volunteers welcoming homeless families into beautifully organized community shelters. And charity guests who felt respected regardless of how much they could afford to donate. The narrator concluded with a simple sentence that perfectly reflected Hazel's philosophy: great design is not measured by how impressive a space appears, but by how deeply the people inside it feel they belong. When Hazel's name was announced as the recipient of the National Humanitarian Design Award, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The standing ovation was immediate, heartfelt, and completely sincere. Accepting the Crystal Award with quiet grace, Hazel delivered a speech as humble as the woman herself. She thanked her parents for teaching her that kindness should never depend upon status. She expressed gratitude to every volunteer who believed small acts of compassion could change someone's entire day. Finally, she turned toward Dante. Her eyes filled with appreciation. "Thank you," she said softly, "for protecting me without ever trying to change the person I wanted to become." Dante's proud smile said more than words ever could. Following the ceremony, reporters gathered around the couple, eager to ask the question everyone seemed curious about. "Chairman Vascari," one journalist began, "you've met some of the world's most accomplished and influential people. What made you fall in love with Hazel?" The room fell silent. Dante looked toward Hazel before answering. "When we first met, she had absolutely no idea who I was." Several reporters smiled. "She wasn't impressed by my company. She wasn't interested in my influence. She never asked about my wealth." He gently reached for Hazel's hand. She noticed the people everyone else overlooked. He paused briefly before continuing. She cared about the elderly couple struggling to find a seat. She remembered the volunteer carrying heavy boxes. She spoke to the dishwasher, the receptionist, the maintenance worker, and the billionaire with exactly the same respect. His voice softened. "She taught me that leadership isn't about being the most important person in the room. It's about making sure no one else feels unimportant." The audience responded with quiet applause, understanding that his answer revealed far more than the story of a successful marriage. It revealed the foundation upon which lasting love had been built. As Hazel and Dante walked toward the theater exit together, another round of applause followed them. This time the recognition belonged entirely to Hazel. She was no longer hidden behind assumptions or introductions. She had become known for exactly what she had always hoped people would see her work: her values, and the quiet compassion that shaped every life she touched. The headlines about the torn dress eventually disappeared. Public fascination faded. Social media moved on, and news stories replaced old scandals. Time erased the gossip, but it could not erase the memory of how Hazel had made people feel. Guests continued speaking about the evening not because of the humiliation they had witnessed, but because it had reminded them that genuine character often appeared in the people least interested in being noticed. Her kindness inspired volunteers to serve with greater compassion. Her humility encouraged leaders to measure success differently. Her forgiveness taught others that dignity could survive even the deepest humiliation. In the end, Hazel Mercer never became extraordinary because she married one of the most powerful men in the country. She became extraordinary because she never allowed power to define who she was. People may forget what you wear, what you own, or even what you achieve, but they never forget how you made them feel. And that was the legacy Hazel Mercer chose to leave behind.